How are you doing today, Sarita?
I am doing well. Hopefully, wow, this is, yeah, we'll hopefully get some. Oh, wait. Yeah, we have people here.
Yeah,
Fabulous.
people are joining right now
Fabulous.
for a little more people to join us today.
Okay, yeah, this is
We're
going to
excited
be
for today's discussion.
me too.
While people are joining, I'm going to go ahead and enable the chat. Yeah. All right, all right. Hello, hello. Hello, Brandon. I invited my wonderful nephew to join
Ah,
today. Join us in San Diego. Good morning, everyone. Such a beautiful day today. You're in LA, correct?
yes, yeah. Did
Wonderful. Awesome.
you want to?
I think that was a direct message to me.
Oh,
Mhm. Yes. Well, I know we're going to give it a couple more minutes for people to join us. Meanwhile, let us know a little bit about yourself. We'll share a little bit more about our program series, some of the work that we do here at Black Tech Link as it relates to our export training series. But yeah, meanwhile, let us know if this is the first time that you're joining us, where you're joining from. We want to know a little bit more who's in the room.
and if anyone's exporting.
Absolutely. Or interested in exporting for sure.
Yes.
Give me one moment.
Okay.
Awesome. Wonderful. Okay, we're going to give it a first couple minutes. All right. Oh, Sarita, with this weather, I feel like summer is here already.
I know. Yeah, like where you are, they were just talking about the weather for because it's good, LA is warm, but yeah, where you're located, I remember it would be hot. But yeah, might
Yes.
as well.
Okay. Thank you for the comments, everyone. Hello, Manuel. The defense contractor means I support the tariffs. Okay. Well, yeah, this is
Yeah.
going to be a really good discussion. There's going to be a lot of different opinions, but I'm really
Hmm.
excited for Sarita to be here today as she is going to share insight on what's going on right now. Before we begin, I want to share a little bit about Black Tech Link. I know a lot of people are joining us for the first time. Give me a moment to share my screen. You see my screen okay?
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, again, thank you so much for everyone that's joined us today. For those that don't know me, my name's Elizabeth Cotton. I am the executive director of Black Tech Link. We are a California-based nonprofit organization, and our mission is to focus on the economic development of Black communities by providing workforce solutions, technical training, and networking opportunities. We primarily support Southern California, although we've supported done programming in the Bay Area and also like just nationwide globally. And I'm excited to have this conversation today as part of a program underneath our small business mastery program. And to tell you a little bit about that, Our organization was recently awarded a couple of grants by the State of California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. The first one is our SB TAP program, Small Business Technical Assistant Program. And that program is primarily to support small businesses that are, no matter what phase you're in, whether it's ideation, whether you're looking to become more sustainable. We provide support services, education services. We have a lot of small business advisors and consultants within our network. So, anywhere that you're at in your business, we're able to provide some consultation. If not, we were not able to provide those services within our network, we're able to refer you to someone else within our network. Another grant is our export training grant that's also through the Go Biz office. And that program is to support new to export companies and companies that do have some experience exporting. We're here to provide resources, education, and some financial assistance through the California STEP program. We initiated this program last year, and during this program, we've hosted workshops that have focused on just financial support in regards to the STEP programming offered by the state of California. We've also provided information provided by the SBA. Um, we've also provided information regarding um, like logistical support if that's an area in need for small businesses, learning how to ultimately get your product from one location to the next. And so, Sarita, and also I see Emmanuel's on this call today. He's also been providing that support as well. Um, we wanted to have like an open, kind of conversation dialogue about what's happening in our country right now with the tariffs and how that is going to export or impact exports right now. And so we're excited to have Sarita Jackson join us. And just to give you a little bit of background about Sarita, Dr. Sarita Jackson is a bilingual English Spanish international trade consultant. She is the founder and CEO of the Global Research Institute of International Trade, um, a Los Angeles based global trade consulting firm which helps companies to minimize their risk and maximize their opportunities to grow globally. Dr. Jackson has worked on international trade projects throughout the United States, Latin America, Caribbean, and South African regions. Her most recent book, International Trade and Services Effective Practice and Policy, was published by Routledge, Taylor, and Francis Group. Additionally, Dr. Jackson is a TEDx speaker and an adjunct professor. She received her BA in journalism, broadcast journalism in Spanish from University of Southern California, Go Titans, and earned a doctorate in political science, emphasis on international political economy from Brown University. And I'm excited to have her today to participate, share insight, especially for my small business people and people that provide support services for small business community, just to kind of, know what's going on in our country and how that may impact the small business community where you're at. Um, Additionally, I wanted to add, we also do provide free business consultations. So if you are a small business owner in need of export consulting services, marketing services, funding services, real estate support services, we are here to help. And so I'll also provide this link in the chat, and you guys are able to schedule time to chat with myself or another consultant directly. But at this time, I want to give a digital round of applause for Sarita Jackson for joining us today, and I will let you take it from here.
Okay. So great. Well, thank you. While I am able to share my screen, but thank you so much. So glad to see a good number of you on the call. Give me 1 second here. Okay. Okay, there we go. All right. Well, thank you for joining us this morning, going into the early part of the afternoon with all of this talk about tariffs and what they mean. And I was kind of following the conversation in the chat from the manufacturers. I saw service provider, just questions about what's going on generally. So we're going to talk a lot about that. But thank you so much, Elizabeth, for inviting me to be on this platform and share this very, very important information that is continuously changing. Right before I got on, I let Elizabeth know, look, I'm still updating because new things are coming down in the news. Like I just literally have to keep the news on to stay abreast of what is happening when it comes to these tariff policies. And I'm so happy to see Emmanuel and some other familiar names and faces, well, names on this call today. So we'll go ahead and dive right in. The focus of today, is looking at all of this talk with these tariff policies, each date that is put out, hear about, and what these tariffs are, and then looking at what it means for U.S. export competitiveness. And so this is going to be a policy discussion and the impact on what it means for the businesses and the manufacturers, but I also will talk a little bit about service providers and some of the opportunities. And as I go through this, each section, I will stop to see if there are any questions or any comments, but because this is supposed to be more of a discussion, I would like more of a discussion. So don't think of it as a lecture or anything like that, but really a discussion. But I will, keep track of the time so that we can get all of the information in before the end of today's webinar. Okay, so our focus is just broken down into 4 different parts today. Like, why the tariffs? This is a question that I get a lot of times on, well, what are these tariffs? What do they really mean? I mean, now people have somewhat of an idea, the taxes on imports, but really dig into why is it that we have tariffs? What do they mean for economies and what do they mean for businesses? And then, can also talk a little bit about what impact they have on consumers, because even businesses are on the consumer side if you're importing goods. So we'll talk about that. Then look at a lot of what is going on just this year with the US tariff policy. And more importantly is what has changed. Like, why is this even a big deal? Because I mean, tariffs aren't new. So what is it that is, why are we talking about this at the degree, the level that we're discussing it in 2025? Then talk about some of what companies, or at least the companies that I'm working with, what they are doing to stay competitive, even in this time of uncertainty. And then just what are some of the policies? In other words, what should we be paying attention to, some of the proposals, and what we can expect for the remaining part of 2025. And if anyone, just kind of backing up, if anyone has any questions once I finish a section, I'm sure Elizabeth will let me know, or you can just open your mic and ask the question. It'll be a bit difficult for me to actually see in the chat. So I just wanted to give you that opportunity. All right, so why tariffs? When we're talking about tariffs, as I mentioned, tariffs, this is something that has been a part of international trade for the longest time. This is not the first time that we've had tariffs on goods, but the reason why we have these tariffs that are placed on goods, well, first of all, let's just define tariffs. Tariffs are those taxes that are placed on any goods that are imported into the United States. Also, other countries will have tariffs. They will place tariffs, a certain percentage, whatever that percentage is, on goods that enter their markets. Now, these are not blanket tariffs. Tariffs usually, it depends on the particular product, what those tariff rates are when those products enter, or that specific product enters another market or coming into the United States. And usually these tariffs are placed, it does generate revenue for the economy, but it also helps to protect domestic producers from outside competition. So that's how tariffs have been used. But then what we're seeing now, sometimes you may see extremely high tariffs. When we go back to the 20th century, you saw extremely high tariffs, which were designed to protect your domestic producers. It was a form of protectionism, hence that term protectionism. But one of the things that I also want to mention here that I think gets lost a lot in the discussion is you hear tariffs, tariffs, tariffs. But when you read some of the statements that come out, and this is something I've also talked about, really is not just about the tariffs, the tariff rates. You also have other things such as non-tariff barriers, which can be used to increase the cost of an international trade transaction, and in some cases can serve as a form of protectionism. So what do I mean by non-tariff barriers? Non-tariff barriers can be anything such as standards, let's say food exports. There can be standards, phytosanitary standards. You don't have to remember all these technical terms, but just standards to make sure that food, when it's crossing into another market, is safe for consumption. Those standards, yes, we want to make sure that we have those standards in place, but sometimes those can be used to protect local producers of that food product. In some cases, or it can be used where it does make it more difficult to enter that market. So regulations, intellectual property regulations, things, any types of regulations that can also be placed on non-tangible goods. So that's very important to include in this discussion. That is not just about the tariffs that's placed on your manufactured goods or agricultural products, but there are other types of regulations that may increase the cost of doing business and can serve as a form of protectionism to protect your local producer. And then that revenue is used to also help with economic growth. Okay. Oh, the other thing too that we hear with regard to kind of the tariff rates, the increased tariff rates, is to reduce the trade deficit, to improve that trade balance. So that again gets to supporting your domestic producers, getting your domestic producers where they are producing, manufacturing, and then selling more, exporting more than what they are buying or bringing in, hence importing. So this is just to give us a sense. I just looked at the top 3 markets here when it comes to Canada, Mexico, and China, so that you can see, we're going to see, okay, what does that trade look like in terms of the US exports to these markets over a 10-year period from 2014 to 2024. And you can see the increase, the growth of US exports to these markets during that period. And then what we can see when it comes to the growth of the imports from these same 3 markets, our top 3 trading partners, over the same period. And as we can see that Mexico increased in terms of importing from Mexico, 71%. China showed a 6.3% decline in Canada. And a lot of that is shaped by policy. Some of the things that we see here, and when we look back to 2016, 2017, around that period where there was the discussion and actually the tariff policy taking effect that was increasing tariffs on goods coming from China. And then this is our trade balance here. So as we can see, just looking at from just in January 2025, that the exports were far less than the imports when we look at both goods and services. However, that number is not as big as it could be because we do have a trade surplus when it comes to services. So if there's anyone that's a service provider that's also on the call, I saw someone in the chat talk about their services briefly. This is also relevant to you, and I will address the role of services and what this means for service providers. But for the United States, we have a surplus when it comes to a service, meaning that we export more services than we import. Most of that trade deficit is when it comes to goods alone, your tangible goods. Okay, any questions before I move on into the the U.S. tariff policy in 2025? Okay.
There was a question in the chat. Can you provide examples of what qualifies as services?
Oh, absolutely. Great question. Thank you. Yeah, when I'm referencing services, I'm mainly talking about professional services. For example, accounting services or financial services, broadly speaking, consulting, education, engineering, architecture, digital marketing, those types of things. Those are the services that you see that's exported. And of course, travel services, hospitality, tourism. Those are the types of services that we really see that I'm talking about when I talk about the export of services, and that you see dominate when it comes to us exporting our services. Great question. Okay. Is that okay? All right. Okay. So that's a really good question. Narrowing down and identifying what we mean by services. And just one thing on that, I just want to kind of throw in there. I was watching, like I have to stay abreast of this, watching the news. And one of the countries, a really small country, was saying, look, we got hit with these tariffs because we're able to export specific products that the United States, that US consumers really want to buy, and things like that. And nonetheless, because we are exporting so much of these particular products to the United States, we're getting hit with a high tariff rate. But what the United States is missing is that we may not import a lot of goods from the United States, but we actually import a lot of services. And again, I stress that because that is a part of the whole trade discussion. And so for service providers, this presents an opportunity to continue to to start to export if you're not already, or to really be a part of that trend when it comes to exporting services. But we will still look at kind of the indirect impact it can have on service providers. Okay, so US tariff policy this year, as I started out, what's the big deal? Why are we talking about this? Tariffs are nothing new. Increase in tariffs are nothing new. But what changed? So let's just go through what these tariff rates are, first of all, then we'll get into what changed, like why this is all a big deal. So, my company and we've been very busy since February, literally, like even though this starts with February 4th, but February 1st, that was really when things hit, responding to clients, working with companies, because that was where the first announcement of the tariffs were supposed to come down the pipeline, but then they were pushed back to February 4th. So what we saw in February that actually was announced and took effect was with regard to China. A 10% tariff on all imports coming from China, which has an impact on $440 billion in goods across electronics to apparel. Then, and this is something that companies also have to take for the exporting side, because the tariffs really it has an impact on the importer. When we're talking about US tariff policy, that really impacts the importer, because it's the importer, and I'm working with companies where all of their production is in China. So if you're importing from China, and just going back to February, you have this additional 10% tariff base that's added on to what was already added on under the previous administration under Trump, this gets costly for you. So that it's really the importers who are impacted. But where the exporters come into the discussion is, okay, what does this mean if I'm exporting out? Usually you have to watch out if the country is placing retaliatory tariffs. That's the thing. Now, if you're an exporter, because this is also some of the things I see where someone may manufacture a product, some parts of that product may come from another country. So then that's where that exporter may have to deal with some of the tariffs, because they're importing parts for the final product that they're exporting out. So in that case, that's where the tariffs are important to them. And hence, as going back to the comment I made earlier about businesses being consumers, they are consumers because they're buying some of these goods or parts, if not a complete part, but some parts, let's say, for their manufacturing from other countries, that affects them in terms of their cost of production. But for someone that is just exporting, and I am working with companies where their production is here in the United States, but they're exporting to other markets, then the question becomes, all right, now you have to look at that country and what their tariff schedule is. It's changing now because now countries are responding with retaliatory tariffs. And so in this case with China, they placed a 10 to 15% tariff on close to $14 billion of US agricultural exports. And usually it is the agricultural producers that get hit first when it comes to retaliatory tariffs. And then you hear about other manufacturing goods or parts that gets impacted by these tariffs. So for companies where they may be producing here in the United States or manufacturing but exporting out, that's where I work with them to look at what are the retaliatory tariffs, and then are those retaliatory tariffs placed on that particular product. In March, we see that the tariffs for Mexico and Canada also took effect, as well as additional tariffs for China. So we saw that in addition to the 10%, now there's a 20% tariff on Chinese goods. Then you had the 25% tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada. And there is a very important caveat with that. The Canadian energy products had a 10% tariff, a much lower tariff. And this had an impact on imports coming from Canada and Mexico, over $900 billion in automobiles, machinery, consumer products. And then Canada announced its retaliatory tariffs. At that time, Mexico held off of about on $107 billion of US goods. And again, I stress there is a caveat to this 25% tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada. That's if the imports do not qualify under the rule of origin set by the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. So just hold on to that thought. I'm going to explain it a little bit more when I get to the announcement from last week, but just keep that in mind. So with this 25% tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada, it is not a blanket tariff. Okay. Then at that time, then there were exemptions, a 1-month exemption, which led to what we saw last week with the announcement on April 2nd for the automotive imports, and then specific USMCA covered goods from Canada and Mexico. Those tariffs were postponed. Then that was the announcement that everybody was waiting for in the international trade community, the reciprocal tariff policy that was announced last week. And also one thing I want to throw in here that's not on the slide is April 3rd, the following day is where you had the announcement, if anybody's into the whole automotive sector, the announcement with regard to tariffs on automotive imports and auto part imports. That's another announcement that came down the pipeline on April 3rd. So with the April 2nd, the main one for all of these tariff rates, for the reciprocal tariff rates for countries all around the world, not focused on specific products, okay? So let's start with the reciprocal tariffs, and then I'll explain all of the information here. So when we talk about reciprocal tariffs, it is basically this idea that whatever tariff rate a country places on products coming from the United States, we're going to place the same tariff on their goods. Okay, I'll repeat that. So the reciprocal tariff means that whatever a country places, whatever their tariff rate is on goods coming from the United States will respond with the exact same tariff rate. That's what the reciprocal tariff rate means. However, on April 2nd, it was a discounted reciprocal tariff rate that was announced. On April 2nd, this was the announcement. The baseline rate, and if anyone has any questions or gets a little lost, because it's a lot going on here, please let me know if you need me to back up, clarify. Please just go ahead, open your mic, let me know. Okay, so what was announced with regard to the reciprocal tariff was that a baseline rate of 10% for all goods coming from different countries around the world would take effect on April 5th. So as you can imagine, that 10% stands out because by the time I got back to my home office on April 2nd, because I was waiting for the announcement and everything. And so for us, it came in the early afternoon. By the time I went to an event, by the time I got back home, let's just say that my WhatsApp, my email, my phone was blowing up from people, whether they were here in the United States, exporting to different countries, wondering what this means for them. I had one client that was getting ready to send off a shipment, was having to respond to questions from her customers, people from West Africa. Is this really true, the 10%? Yes, that's the baseline tariff rate, the starting rate, but that does not mean all countries have just the 10%. Those that are at the baseline, that's the lowest. And there are many that are much higher than the 10%. Okay. Then the discounted reciprocal tariff rate. Okay. What the discounted means is, as opposed to, let's say, another country imposes 30% tariffs on our goods, as opposed to us hitting that country, imports from that country with a 30% tariff rate, we discounted it at 50%, half of that rate. So instead of the 30%, the United States will impose a 15% tariff rate, just for the sake of this example. And that was supposed to, took effect today. Like I said, I kept watching the news. It was supposed to take effect today, April 9th. Okay. Before I continue, I just want to make sure, are there any questions about the huge announcement, what it meant from April 2nd with regard to reciprocal tariffs? Okay. All right. Okay. So I guess, okay, so everything is clear. And everybody better pay attention because I'm going to ask questions at the end of this. No, just kidding. Okay. All right. So that was the big thing in the international trade community with regard to what is going on with tariffs. So now looking at our top trading partners, now you have with China, that reciprocal tariff rate is at 34% on top of the 20%. And so when it comes to China, and like I said, I'm working with clients that, their production is in China, all of it, quite frankly, their suppliers, etc. And so now they're having to deal with this continuous increase in the tariff rates. Okay, and I'll talk about Section 301, but that's one of the pieces or the tariff rulings or trade laws that is being used to justify these high tariff rates. Okay. Canada and Mexico still have this 25% tariff. However, if your good is USMCA compliant, then you are exempt. Okay. So if the good is USMCA compliant, they are exempt as long as it's not steel and aluminum and energy from Canada and things like that. Those that do have a tariff rate regardless of the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. But when it comes to other goods that are USMCA compliant, they are exempt from the reciprocal tariffs. So what does it mean? How do I know if I am USMCA compliant? So if you're importing from Canada or Mexico into the United States, there is a process that you have to follow to show and make sure that that product satisfies what's called a rules of origin. A rule of origin determines or shows, I should say, not determines, shows the regional value content of that product. Meaning, in its simplest form, was this product manufactured in the United States, Mexico, or Canada? That's that. That's it in its simplest form. Then depending on the product, and this is where you work with a licensed customs broker, your freight forwarder is just going to move your goods. They're not going to get into all the, how do you classify your product? And then can you make sure, they're going to ask for your documentation, etc. But the customs broker will work with you to make sure that you classify your product correctly, and also that you have done the proper calculation or shown that this product was manufactured in North America, whatever the percentage, whatever that rule of origin is, whatever that percentage is, and how you calculate it, to make sure that it satisfies the USMCA, it is compliant, and then can benefit from no duties, duty-free treatment, as we call it. And duties, just for the sake of this, we're just using duty and tariff interchangeably, okay? So just meaning that tariffs will not be placed on your product crossing the borders between US and Mexico or US and Canada. So that's what that means with regard to being exempt from the reciprocal tariffs. And I'm going to talk about a company where I'm working with them on this very same matter, because I've just talked about importing, but then what does that mean for an exporter? So I will provide more detail about that. But this, just for the sake of just for right now, is just understanding what these tariffs are all about, or what the tariff policy is all about. Okay, any questions on this slide? Questions, comments, concerns? Anyone? I'd be curious if anyone is exporting. I know many new to export or considering exporting, but if anyone is encountering some of these tariffs and things like that having an impact on their business, I would love to hear from you. Feel free to share. Okay, let's see. All right, so as I mentioned, the tariffs that we talked about that were supposed to take effect this morning, well, right before I got on the call, I hear, oh, there is a 90-day pause on tariffs for all of the trading partners. So now we have an additional 90 days with the tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs, or the discounted reciprocal tariffs that were announced last week on April 2nd, except for China. China, let's see what it says. Now the duties faced by China will now rise to 125% effective immediately. So that's mainly one of the things that I'll have to continue working with companies that are sourcing from China, producing in China. But as far as the other partners, for now, there is a 90-day pause. Okay.
I see a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
Well, first question by Brandon, do you think it is fair for the US to impose those tariffs? And the second question was the rule of origin policy to prevent China from circumventing the tariffs by sending their products to Mexico to be assembled.
Okay, I'm going to start with the second one. That is a very, very good question. And one of the things that I deal with companies where they try to do that, say, hey, can I have it manufactured in China and then send it through Mexico, get it to the United States so that I can benefit from the USMCA? So the answer to your question is yes. The answer to the question with the rules of origin and things of that nature, to make sure you show that that product was manufactured in North America, was designed to prevent the kind of the transshipment. When NAFTA, which preceded the USMCA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, took effect, you kind of saw that shortly, not too long after, where producers were getting their material from China, then bringing it through Mexico. So yes, it is designed to make sure that it's just for the US, Mexico, and Canadian producers. So I hope that answers the question, keeping it as simple as possible. And then the question about, do I think the tariffs are fair? Yes, I get it. I get imposing tariffs. The way in which is what I'm going to talk about, the way in which we're going about it is creating more challenges than benefits. So let me just back up. So with the whole idea with these tariffs, the high tariff rates, to play fair, bring manufacturing back to the United States. Like, I get it theoretically. And the reason why is because my understanding of international trade and international trade policy is not just about business transactions. Like, I come from like the whole historical policy side. I totally get it. But then there are mechanisms that are put in place to do that, to increase tariff rates. And so this kind of unilateral approach can create more challenges in the sense that we're trying to go back to the way the market was, let's say, before kind of this, before the 1990s. I'll say that, you had the market, the global economy gradually opening up, but when it really opened up by the 1990s, now you're trying to undo all of that. We're so integrated with so many markets, trying to do all of that to bring manufacturing back. So then the question becomes, how long will that take? Is it really possible in the state that we're in? Okay. And then, then it just ruins relationships with our trade partners because now they're going to hit back. So then what does that mean for, if I rely on exporting to grow my business, well, that can hurt my business, which in the long run can have an impact on the economy. So the short answer to your question is, I get increasing tariffs. I am for tariffs. I just, this whole thing about zero tariffs, please, because it would just be a calamity, right? You have to have some kind of tariffs. You can't just have, all external competition to ruin a domestic industry. And that's not just for the United States, that's any country around the world. However, it's the way in which they are being implemented, which is questionable. Let's just put it that way. Right. So tariffs, I mean, they serve their purpose. I get it. But then it's just the way in which they're implemented and really studying the impact on your businesses, your business community, and your consumers, just an everyday person. Right. And so, yeah, so that's how I feel on tariffs. But I'm not one where it's like, no tariffs, but just following the protocol to increase tariffs so it's not as devastating. Okay. And I guess that kind of, well, is there another question too? I want to answer the
A lot of
questions because
questions.
that dovetails into, that's a good segue to the next part. Okay, go ahead.
There's a few questions in the chat, and I thought a lot of people have questions. We're going to tailor to the questions to the end of the presentation during our talkback segment, where we'll invite panelists in the call directly, and they can ask Sarita their questions directly.
Okay. All right. Okay, cool. All right. So I shall continue.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is so this was a good part, that question about tariffs. So like I said, I mean, I've been at this talking about tariffs, and and I'm just going to share an interesting story. When I started my company in 2013, as Elizabeth mentioned, I mean, I come from an academic background. I've also done consulting around the world. And so what you're seeing with my company is combining both the academic, understanding international trade negotiations. That was my focus on international trade negotiations and what it means for businesses and different industries, so on and so forth. And then traveling around the world to actually see how these work. So when it comes to talking about tariffs, it's okay, so what does this mean from a policy perspective? And when I started my company in 2013, when I would talk about tariffs, nobody cared. Basically, I would talk to business people like, hey, have you thought about the at that time NAFTA, these trade agreements? What about trade programs? And then you can take advantage of these programs because you have lower duty rates, the Caribbean Basin Initiative, and nobody really paid attention until they got hit by tariffs. And when I started giving workshops, that's when they would pay attention. And so where the value add was, where I would say, well, it's these policies that have an impact. You can talk about trade, international trade strategy, competitiveness strategy, all you want, but if there are policies that's going to impact your ability to compete, then you really need to understand that impact. It's not just, oh, that's something that's happening in Washington, D.C., or governments just having these chats. No, this really has an impact. And so once companies were impacted by some of these tariff increases, even before the first Trump administration, different administrations where they had increased tariffs on specific products, then that's where they understood, okay, this is something that, we need to pay attention to as much as possible and go about the day-to-day of our business. So answering the question of, well, so what's the big deal? Why is this different? Well, when you had tariff increases, the way this would work is if you're an industry, I'll just say tires, right? For manufacturing tires, because this actually happened. And you realize that you are not able to compete domestically because there's unfair competition, not just competition. The whole point of the global economy is to have competition. You cannot eliminate competition, but it's when it is unfair competition, then the producers would petition the U.S. International Trade Commission to do research to determine whether or not the industry has actually been negatively affected due to unfair competition. Okay, let me just briefly, what do I mean by unfair competition? That just basically means if certain goods are sold in the US market, and then this can also apply to other countries, but for the US, if goods are sold here in the United States at a below market value, that creates an unfair competition. So that's one such example, right? So usually an industry will petition the U.S. International Trade Commission, located, it's a nonpartisan organization located in Washington, D.C. And if anyone wants to know about classifying their goods, this is also, I go to them as well as customs, but the U.S. International Trade Commission has all of your harmonized tariff schedule codes. Nonetheless, they do the research, then they go through the U.S. Trade Representative's office, and it's the U.S. Trade Representatives that negotiate our agreements. The USTR will say, okay, yes, based on this research, there's unfair trade practices that's having an impact on our local producers in this particular industry. And then you go through the World Trade Organization, the WTO. There's a dispute settlement process. And then if there's still, if the countries do not, or if one country does not agree, then you have an appellate process, an appeals process, I should say, appeals process. So you go through the World Trade Organization. And if the WTO, which governs international trade globally, if the WTO says, okay, yeah, the country X was engaging in unfair practices, therefore we will allow country Y to raise tariffs on goods from country X, then that's justified, and that's usually what you saw when it comes to increasing tariff rates. Okay. Now, before I get to the current path, the other thing to keep in mind when we're talking about tariff rates, now, for the most part, generally speaking, and putting it within the historical context, most countries already have low tariffs. So it's not as if you're seeing countries that are saying, we're placing 100% tariffs on US goods. No, because if they're part of the WTO, you have agreed to keep tariff rates low at a certain level, and then zero if you have a trade agreement or if that's what you decide to have. So for the most part, tariff rates are really low. But again, what we're seeing in this discussion is really about the tariffs plus the non-tariff measures that add to the cost of doing business in that market. Okay, so I just wanted to stress that. Now, what we're seeing with the current path is not necessarily going through where the industry brings a case and there's research, and then we take it to the WTO, and then the WTO says, yes, okay, we see that there's some unfair practices, therefore you can increase your tariff rates on those specific goods coming from that particular market. No, what we're seeing here is more of a unilateral approach where within our own, here in the United States, different trade acts, that where we are using that now to say, this is what we use to justify increasing tariffs on goods coming from China, Mexico, Canada, and now different countries around the world. And that's usually under the idea of national security, that this is having an impact on our national security. Okay, so I'm just summing up instead of going through each of the policies, just to keep it as simple, that this is what we're seeing, that we're using these different sections of different trade acts under the argument that this has an impact on national security to justify these tariff increases. Okay. All right. So having said all of that, with what is going on, the business owner is just, well, how do I stay competitive, especially if I'm already exporting? So one of the things, now let me just preface this by saying, of course, with so many changes, as you saw today, even a couple of weeks ago, when I gave a talk to some business executives, same thing, while I'm talking, right before I give a presentation, some breaking news with regard to the trade policy. So it makes it difficult or more challenging to have a long-term strategy. Nonetheless, it doesn't mean you just give up and throw your hands in the air, that there are some things you can do or at least incorporate in your plan to move forward. But yes, obviously with different companies, the smaller companies, and mostly what I work with, you have to really assess your resources to see if you're able to do these things. But number one, to diversify your market, to determine if you have the resources to diversify your market for exporters exporting to other markets. And that's where staying on top of these policies for you as an exporter. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the tariffs, that's mainly for the importers having to pay those tariff rates. And then, then it depends on the company if how much of that they're going to pass on to the end user. But for the exporters, this is where looking at these policies, and this is something that I do anyway. So I'm able to help companies by keeping them abreast of these policy changes because they're trying to focus on manufacturing their product and selling it. That totally makes sense. So staying abreast of, okay, so if we implement a 35% tariff, a reciprocal tariff on goods coming from market X, and this is the market that to which you're exporting, then really following to see how is that how is that country responding? What are their tariff rates, the retaliatory tariffs that I talked about, and then do those tariffs really apply to your product? Because that's one of the things everyone gets all up in arms. Oh my goodness, these tariff rates. But then the question becomes, does it really apply to your product? Because as you saw from some of just what I showed you from February until today, literally, that it may vary by product, that you also have to make sure you understand what are the tariff rates with regard to your product that a country may place in their own policy. Leverage trade agreements, and I will give my now disclaimer on that. One of the things I would often talk about for companies, especially your smaller companies with limited resources, is to start those markets where we have a trade agreement, such as the US, Mexico, Canada agreement, and any other agreement that we have with countries around the world. To start with the countries where we have a trade agreement, because that means you can be competitive, you have easier access to those markets, you're competitive in the sense that the tariffs are not placed on your goods in that market. The agreement will usually, the whole point of these agreements is to eliminate tariffs. Now, there may be a part where it's phasing out, where the tariffs are being reduced over a certain period of time, but the end goal is to eliminate tariffs. Now, with regard to what is happening today, the best, when I've worked with clients, the best that I could do is say, really focus on the USMCA, because I'm not hearing or seeing too much. Once a tariff rate goes up for countries, the other countries with which we have a trade agreement or a trade program, we'll talk about that, or a trade program, it doesn't seem that there are any exemptions, but with the USMCA, that has been explicitly stated. And we're safe to say that, okay, with the USMCA, if they are compliant, if the product is compliant with the USMCA, then you can import and still have the duty-free treatment. But then we need to look at, okay, so how does Mexico and Canada, because now that you have this exemption, that we're still abiding by the agreement itself, that they're still holding to that and not imposing additional retaliatory tariffs. Supply chain management, including negotiating with your suppliers in these markets where you see that if you, and not just China, but other countries, if you see that there's going to be a change in the policy, to really try to do the best you can and work with someone who focuses on supply chain that can help you with managing and help you with negotiating with your suppliers, determining costs, so on and so forth. And then the last one is for the manufacturers to work with service providers for efficiency and effectiveness, to boost your competitiveness, being able to respond faster, whatever it is, embracing technology, things of that nature. But for the service providers, this really presents an opportunity for you to work with the manufacturers as they try to figure this out. Financial service providers, where you're working with manufacturers, global manufacturers, to help them to understand, what is going on from a financial perspective and do different calculations so that they can figure out what's the best approach moving forward under the current conditions. Okay. And then for service providers, regardless, if you're not working with manufacturers directly, let's say, then if you're providing a service, you're not getting hit with these tariffs. So that's that for the service providers, but you may be affected indirectly if you're working with manufacturers that are getting hit by tariffs and, they're your clients or so on and so forth. There may be some indirect impacts. Okay. All right. So let me see. Okay. Before I go to the next slide, I want to talk about the work with the current exporting manufacturer following these 4 points here. Is with this current manufacturer that I'm working with, their production is all here in the United States, and they're exporting to one of the USMCA countries. And with that particular case, they basically followed what I normally, as I mentioned earlier, that I normally advise small companies. When they did their research, they said, why not start in our own backyard in terms of exporting, Canada or Mexico? And now it's benefiting them. Now, they were concerned on April 2nd. That was one of the calls I had to address. They were concerned, like, what does this mean for us? But the benefit, and now even more so now with this 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs, generally excluding China, because their product does receive that duty-free treatment, it doesn't fall under any of the 25% tariffs on specific goods that the United States has laid out. And so that particular company is able to leverage trade agreements, leverage the USMCA specifically, as it continues to export and provide send its product to its customers overseas. So in this particular case, it was basically point number 2, leveraging the trade agreements. And then now with the announcements that have come out that for any USMCA compliant good, that good is able to still receive duty-free treatment. Now for them exporting, what we had to do was go and look at those markets and see, okay, how are they responding? What are the retaliatory tariffs? Because they said, Canada, for example, still has its retaliatory tariffs. And then see if your product or products, in this case, a lot of times it's different products, looking at the HS code, are these products on that retaliatory tariff list? If not, then you can continue on as normal. So that's the case of how this company was able to remain competitive by starting out with the USMCA and starting out with those markets. Okay, and just briefly here, the work, kind of like what we do when we're working with companies to get to that point of leveraging trade agreements, or if not, if exporting to a country where we don't have a trade agreement, understanding, is this the right market? This is just an overview. Doing an assessment of that company, as I mentioned, to make sure that you have the resources where you can be flexible with these changing policies, or if you are in a market and you're entrenched in that market, to develop a strategy to continue to weather the storm, if you will, making sure that you classify your product and service. So I work with service providers as well on classifying their product, identifying the right market. And so this, and it's the whole market ID, taking a systematic approach to identifying the right market for your product or service, is even more important now with these changes, just with the tariff policy alone. So there is a whole process of saying, okay, this is why. Again, anyone can tell you what to do, how to do it, but if you don't know why you're doing it and you're missing all of these variables or these factors that's impacting your ability to do the what and the how, then you might be in for a rude awakening. So really taking the systematic approach in the current climate, any climate, quite frankly, with whether it's times of certainty or uncertainty, but even more so now, and then doing an assessment of that market, looking at the tariff and the non-tariff barriers. It's not just about the tariffs, it's those non-tariff barriers and any kind of trade agreements, policies. Some countries, when the whole reciprocal agreement was announced, some countries were saying, well, we're going to lower the tariff rates on goods coming from the United States, et cetera, so that they can make sure that they can continue to trade with the United States, because it's not just about our exporters, the US exporters, but their exporters selling their goods to the United States, understanding the policy. And so for me, coming from international trade from a policy perspective, understanding what these policies mean for you, developing a strategy, providing the resources, and then working with the right people to move forward. Okay, let's take a moment. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, nope. Okay. And as we wrap up, the last thing now in 2025, what should we be paying attention to moving forward? Well, one, I do a lot of work with Latin America, Caribbean, and Sub-Saharan Africa, was mentioned in the introduction. One of the things I'm really watching is this whole African Growth and Opportunities Act, or AGOA. Now, that's mainly for the US importers, because AGOA is designed, this goes back to 2000, is designed to promote trade between the United States and eligible African countries for eligible products. So for an importer, if I say, okay, there's a product or something that's unique to the continent of Africa, that I can import that and don't have to worry about paying duties, or it's much lower, let's just say, lower duties or no duties on that product. And it's a benefit for the exporters from those countries to get access to the US market. So I mentioned that because that's one of the things to look at with US-Africa trade. And then also, I don't have written here, but the African Continental Free Trade Area, to see what that will mean for exporters to that market. The African Continental Free Trade Area is a trade bloc on the continent to promote intra-regional trade amongst the African countries. But then they also have their rules that exporters trying to enter that market have to follow. But I say that to say that one of the policies from the import side is this AGOA, to see what will happen in September of this year. Each time AGOA has to be reauthorized after a certain period. So we'll see what happens with the reauthorization by the US Congress of AGOA. Also with the World Trade Organization, the WTO. Now, there are discussions about the strength of the WTO when it comes to trade disputes. Now, nonetheless, we have seen where China, Canada have filed trade disputes against the United States with these tariffs. Also the trade policies around the world. So if you are a business and say you're thinking about a particular market now, because of these retaliatory tariffs, it is very important to understand what their policies are, not just at the general level, but what their policies are specifically and what it means for your particular product when entering that market. And then yesterday, one of the it was just announced, there's nothing formal about it. It just mentioned in the news that the United States maybe is thinking about, and maybe there's an announcement coming down the pipeline about placing tariffs on imports of pharmaceuticals. Okay. And yeah, that is pretty much it. That extensive overview of what is going on, why the tariffs, why the discussion, and what it means for your business as an exporter or soon to be exporter.
Oh, Sarita, that was really good presentation and very in-depth. I really appreciate your time. I'm gonna also put your information in the chat for
Okay.
anyone that is interested in connecting directly with Sarita. If you are an exporter or you're looking to export, I would definitely highly encourage you to connect with Sarita. Um, and at this time, you know, there's a lot of questions in the chat. Um,
Oh,
I
thank you,
want,
Brandon.
yeah. I want to invite everyone that's been on the call, the opportunity to ask your questions directly to Sarita. And so, let me see.
Oh,
During this segment, we call it Talk Back, and it gives, attendees directly the opportunity to connect and chat. And so, yeah, if anyone wants to come off camera, share information. I know Brandon had a lot of questions.
okay.
Hey, I don't see an option for the camera, but can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So I did have a question. How did they collect tariff money?
So when a good comes through customs, when it comes through customs, that's when they collect the money. The duties.
But like, so the importer is like paying them? Like, I just
So
it
what's
doesn't.
the process when the good comes through customs and then who's paying for it? I'm gonna have to, Elizabeth, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to put you on the spot because you used to do kind of the movement of the goods, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, because I know kind of the
So far
general.
removed from that, but
Oh, I think you had kind of worked directly with like, because I know like the importer will have to pay, or it depends on what the Incoterms, but I kind of want to get someone that's closer or was closer to that, or want to kind of describe that process when a good comes through customs.
Yeah, because I'm just kind of imagining like a big boat with a bunch of goods on it coming through, and it's like, how do they even like logistically handle that? It sounds kind of unwieldy.
Yeah. Or you want me to just take a stab at it, Elizabeth? Because I know
yeah,
you have worked kind of. I'm sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, it all depends on like kind of what the agreement is between the importer and the exporter. And then I can't give you like the exact detail because I know there is a process, but I have not been involved with how that money looks. So if anyone and I'm one of these people, hey, I'm not gonna make stuff up. If there's anyone that can answer that question that's on the call, I would really appreciate it if you can answer that question. I mean, otherwise, Brandon, if you want to send me a message, I can do a little research to be accurate and send you that information.
And I
Yeah, that'd be
think,
great.
and
Thanks.
I think
Will that
that
work for you?
those monies are paid to Customs and Border Patrol. So,
Yeah. And through their system, they have a digital system that they pay that money through. And that's as much as I know about it.
It's been over 10 years since I've worked in
Oh,
global
okay.
logistics. So,
Yeah, no worries.
like
And I
literally.
didn't mean to put you on the spot. Sorry.
So, I see Erhan Ark. Raise your hand. Erhan? Am I saying that correctly?
Thank you for the presentation. So I have a quick question. Do you know any online source, online link, online website that we can calculate our tariff costs while we are exporting or importing as well? But when we are selling our products from United States to, for example, China, or for example, to the Europe, is there any way to calculate with the existing tariffs? You know,
Yeah,
everything they are changing, but is there any online source that we can leverage, can use to calculate when we are providing the cost of our services and also products?
okay. So to answer that, I mean, you can find out, the tariff rates and calculate that into your cost. But then it's not just about the tariffs. You also have like the full landed costs with moving your good. I know you mentioned both goods and services. So just sticking with the good side, like you really would have to know, and I do have information that I can share with you on calculating all of your landed costs beyond just the tariffs. And so I'm not aware of a site, but I have that information. Otherwise, are you working with a licensed customs broker?
While we are exporting, no,
Uh-huh.
we are just exporting. It's very straightforward. But to import it, yes. So, but my question is, for example, when we are exporting to Canada, so
Yes.
depends on our product code or service. So tariffs are changing. So there should be some tool to calculate that cost for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's changing like literally hour by hour, the tools aren't keeping up. And that's one of the challenges that one of my clients was facing because, she was referred to something that we commonly use just looking for tariffs, but it's not keeping up with the
Right.
continuous changes. And that's why it's very important to work with someone that's able to keep up with it and make those calculations. But then again, a lot of us, and I say us, it's the international trade attorneys that are dealing with these costs or other matters, because one of the things I did not get into, other matters like sanctions and which countries you can go to and not go to, all of these different things. All of us are really trying to keep up and basically saying this information is based on the data or what has been announced as of this date and as of this time, because just like, right before this call, I was getting ready to say, okay, these tariffs have taken effect this morning, April 9th. Then right before I get on the call, oh, nope, there's a 90-day pause. So the tools, the online tools aren't keeping up with the hour by hour by hour or even the day by day changes. So working with someone that can make sure you have the information and documentation to show that you are operating in good faith based on the information that you have. That's why I really stress working with a licensed customs broker, international trade attorney, researcher, such as myself to keep, to look at that. But but make sure it's not just about the tariffs, but it's the full landed cost of exporting your product.
Really
Um,
great.
so gonna
Please share the information if you after follow up
Let's see, you
together
have
with me. Thank you.
my contact
Yeah.
information in the chat somewhere. So please go ahead. You can email me. I will get back to you. Trust me, I will get back to you. So just send me an email and then I can share some of the formula. Also, if somebody's curious, how do I determine the rule of origin? That's stuff that I'm able to share with you.
All right.
Yeah,
I will. Thank you.
I'm also gonna put like this resource in the chat. Let me see. It's a trade website and they have like a global tariff like finder tool.
Yeah, the
And
HTS tariff finder.
mm-hmm. And let
Yeah.
me go ahead and put this link in the chat. Give me one moment.
Yeah, that was the link. Yeah, that's a really good link
Mm-hmm.
that Elizabeth is going to put in, but then you still have to be aware of the nuances.
Yeah, such as like the shipping costs,
Mhm.
things like that. If you're moving goods by air, by ocean, things like that. Uh,
Oh, can I let's see, this is for, yeah, okay, no, this is good. Yeah, so this is a good start, but still work with someone because of all of these changes. It may not be as updated.
Yeah, definitely working with like a freight forwarder or a customs broker, super key. But, it's always great to kind of, before you have those conversations with a customs broker, or a freight forwarder, to kind of do your own research. And so definitely utilizing the tools provided by the International Trade Administration is very important. Um, I also see Kofi Amankwa.
Wow, you got that right. Most people butcher that name. Thank you guys so much for putting this together. This is awesome. My question is, I'm shipping items to Africa, particularly Ghana, next few months. Not for business though. It's just for personal items I'm shipping to members. And so this is probably a dumb question, but how is it going to affect me shipping these tariffs going to affect me shipping these items?
Well, you're fine because you're shipping out. The tariffs are for goods coming in. So Ghana has that. Oh, well, now it's the 90-day pause, but at the time it was of the announcement last week, it was 10%. They were at that base 10%, but that affects mostly the importers. But for you exporting to Ghana, you should be fine, no different than any other time. Just make sure whatever your items are and what the tariff rates, and if there's any compliance issues, regulations, anything that you need to be aware of for the Ghanaian market. But you won't be impacted by these tariffs.
Thank you.
Okay.
Merab Kasi.
Hi. Yeah, I was actually curious as to why China's the main country that's being hit with tariffs. Like, is there like a feud going on that you can clarify?
Because our trade deficit is the largest between China. So that's one of the reasons. And then previously, remember when I was talking about kind of what's different now, prior, there have been cases where with different industries where there were some unfair trade practices. And then it's more difficult for US producers to get in that, and service providers. It really isn't just the producers to get into that market. And so with our current administration, he's saying, look, we're going to have fair trade, not have unfair trade practices such as dumping, which is what I was describing earlier when I was saying selling goods at below market value here, and then to narrow the trade deficit. So that's why China is the main focus, because most of our goods, like when you think about it, if you look at your t-shirt, whatever, most of our really low cost goods are from China.
Yeah, I also noticed that. And it makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense with like the cheap goods that we can buy there. I have another question as well, two actually. But usually when tariffs in the past have been put up, it was like on specific industries or like a specific country, but now it's on all countries and industries. How do you think it's going to play out?
Well, no, I think it's going to be extremely challenging. I mean, and I say this just from what we've seen historically. This is not the first time the United States has done this to close itself off, have all these really, really, really high tariffs, protectionists, and all it did was make the Great Depression worse. So I see where it's going to be extremely challenging on specific products, industries. It's going, the costs of those goods are going to go higher. yeah, it's just going to be a trade war where no one really wins, quite frankly. No one really wins.
Yeah, I had a feeling. Um,
Yeah.
Last question.
Mhm.
Do you think the cost of goods for just like an average consumer, like regular American going to buy stuff at a grocery store or convenience store, do you think that it's going to increase? Or is there going to be some sort of offset? Basically, do you think this is the start of another recession?
I think yeah, I think that some of the goods are going to increase. Now there are talks of this could lead to a recession, but as far as consumer goods, yeah, it will definitely increase. But then it also, many goods, it's going to depend on the company and how much of those costs they're going to pass on to the consumer. Then it's going to depend on where they're getting most of their goods from to determine those costs. Yeah, we're going to see an increase there, and I'm not going to throw out a number. There are different numbers thrown out there, reports by economists that you can easily look up and find on their assessment, but definitely costs are going to go up. And there have been, prior to today's announcement with the 90-day pause, talks about a potential recession coming from the trade war. So yeah, we will see, because it's hard to say because things keep changing. But overall, like I said, historically, we've been here before and it did not lead to the result that we wanted.
I
And then
see.
especially with other countries now where they're retaliating. So, and then it has an impact on them.
Lovely. Well, thank you, Dr. Jackson. I
You're
appreciate it.
welcome. Okay, and Brandon?
Hey, I just if I can, is it okay if I speak to the China
Oh,
question
absolutely. Yeah, when
from
you're
like
ready.
a cybersecurity slash national defense perspective? Like China has been implicated in many different situations for like stealing intellectual property and initiating like cyber attacks against the United States. I believe the OPM hack from about 10 years ago or so is one of the most like widespread, where the Office of Personnel Management, they basically took like a bunch of private records for government employees and stuff like that. And not only that, but uh, we're basically, if China's ramping up their like military spending, so like us like buying a bunch of stuff from China is basically giving them the money to like beef up their military, so that if there's any type of conflict, we're basically like strengthening our enemy. And it sucks to have to think about the potential of war, especially with China or any other country, but it's just a reality. Like that's they want to be the dominant power in the world, just as much as we do. So yeah, it's definitely like that should be I think it is being considered as a factor in these tariffs.
Yeah, well, on the intellectual property side, also, that if you are trying to export to the export to China too, where you have to give over some of your intellectual property. So that I know that definitely has been a huge issue, where getting a lot of, our IP if you're trying to enter that market. And so we'll see how this plays out. And China is, basically that's why they have been excluded from the 90-day pause, because China has not come to the table to make any adjustments. China just said, okay, we're going to respond with retaliatory tariffs, and that's that. Whereas other countries were saying, okay, we're going to try to do something to avoid our exporters being hit with these tariffs going into the US market. And China has not. So it's just one of those, we have to continue to see how this plays out. But thank you, Brandon. No, I really appreciate that too.
No, I appreciate everyone and who's joined us today. And thank you so much, Sarita, for your expertise and just sharing insight on what's going on. I have put in the chat like a link to our Calendly if anyone is interested in just chatting more with Sarita or myself or another one of our consultants. Please feel free to reach out if you're looking at, and Sarita has also put her email directly in the chat. If you're looking for advice on exporting or any other type of small business needs, please feel free reach out. And I just want to say thank you again. Please, at this time, please give Sarita a digital round of applause for such a great job. And then I saw Natasha. Did you have a question? Nay, that is okay. So we're gonna call it, let's see, in the chat. Just looking for reactions. Good, good.
Oh, I just want to remind the people that have questions about some of the resources. So Elizabeth put a really great resource for the tariff tool, but anything else that I mentioned, I was going to send, just send me an email and I can send that to you as some additional resources as well for calculating your landed costs and the going through the payment for customs or payment of tariffs. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Well, have a wonderful day. If you're joining us from Cali, have a great week. Enjoy this weather, and look forward to connecting with you all soon. And be on the lookout for more export training workshops.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you.
Bye. Thank you.